Hi everybody, and thank you for taking time to view and listen to this short PowerPoint presentation regarding Gold Standard version 3. My name's Owen Hewlett. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at Gold Standard, responsible for the development of version 3. I'm joined by my colleague Sarah Lugers, Director of Marketing and Communications here at the Foundation, who will also discuss briefly some of the demand side element of what we're looking to achieve here. So the purpose of this presentation is to brief key targeted consultees to the Foundation. We're really keen to make sure we obtain feedback from all of the key organisations that support and work with us, as well as going to more broad open public comment. I'm going to talk about the Gold Standard vision, mission and theory of change which will inform the Gold Standard version 3 rationale, before I go and talk a little bit more about the detail of what will be in version 3 and what it's used for. Sarah will then finish up with some discussion on market development and demand side, and then lastly I'll close the presentation by talking about some of the development timelines. The Gold Standard vision, mission and theory of change. So as of February this year, we appointed a new Chief Executive Officer, Marion Veil, and immediately commenced a process of strategic review that led to a new vision and mission, and more lately a consideration of our theory of change as a non-profit. So our new vision refers to climate security and sustainable development for all, maximising the impact of climate and development and creating robust standards that lead to responsible management of resource. This really consolidates previous thinking, but also reflects some deep strategic reviews that happened during 2015. As a foundation, we've never had a theory of change before. A theory of change really is a compass for organisations such as ourselves that are mission driven, and really helps us articulate how our vision and mission translates into real change. So what is our mission and what do we do to achieve it? And this slide briefly summarises our thinking there. So referring to our climate security and sustainable development mission, we design and develop tools and standards to improve the effectiveness of activities, and we certify those activities under the gold standard. That allows us to do three key things. It allows us to report credibly on impact. It allows us to demonstrate best practice, but also allows us to work on results-based finance mechanisms. And ultimately, the change in the world that delivers is to create direct impacts through the activities themselves, but also to drive investment and to influence policy and regulation. That's how the gold standard achieves its mission, and that's where version 3 will fit. So the rationale for version 3 is a direct response to the theory of change. It actually articulates and is articulated through the theory of change. A bit of background information. This is a pivotal year, really, if you think of our mission in terms of what will happen at Paris COP21 and the recent publication of the Sustainable Development Goals, and clearly the need for huge investment in both of those areas. So we feel very much that gold standard is at the intersection of two global agendas that accord with our own mission and theory of change. So this is a big year for the world, but also a big year for gold standard in terms of our development, and so it's timely. Version 3 is a very timely thing. So how do gold standard activities demonstrate best practice, drive investment and improve regulation? Well, we are holistic, so we really do address safeguards, trade-offs and sustainable development contributions in the environmental, social and economic topic areas. At the heart of the gold standard is inclusive design. It has been for the entire history of the foundation, the inclusion of stakeholders and engagement with stakeholders. Results-based measurement and real MRV is very important to us, so that we can demonstrate that the impacts from our activities contribute to the sustainable development agenda and are credible and real. And as an NGO, credibility and transparency clearly a huge part of what we do, and we're going to use version 3 to really drive that transparency in the market. The rationale for version 3 specifically, well, there's 5 key areas I've identified here, without wishing to read through them one by one. The first is critical. We operate across a complex set of scopes, 3, energy, land use and water, and are looking to consolidate that front end into a single gold standard gateway to reduce burden of having to read so many different documents, remove the inconsistency and remove any sort of mixed messages that 3 scopes inevitably implies. We want to build on the existing approach to GHG emissions reduction methodologies and indeed water benefit methodologies to see how those can be applied in a results-based framework for contribution to the sustainable development goals. So really linking our knowledge, our approach, our theory of change to the global agenda. We also want to take the opportunity to guide better what people can do with those results-based products. So carbon credits being one results-based finance model, but there are others. For the first time, we really want to drive claims guidance, product specifications, and make sure it's really clear and transparent on what people can and can't say about their products and what they purchase and what they claim. We firmly believe results-based finance is a major opportunity to drive finance to the development agenda, and Gold Standard version 3 will allow us a flexible approach to incorporating and testing various results-based finance mechanisms, so learning by experimentation. And then lastly, it's clear that a huge number of corporates and government and investors are interested and keen to involve themselves in the Sustainable Development Goals as a global agenda. And so Gold Standard version 3 is really a framework built around those goals. So in summary, Gold Standard version 3 is comprehensive and integrated. It will guide best practice for activities. It'll provide tools to assess trade-offs for the first time, and I'll talk more about that later in the presentation. It'll provide methodologies inspired by the carbon markets for other sustainable development contributions, taking the best of what we do now. And it really allows us to start developing other results-based finance mechanisms within the SDGs. So as I say, we're really going to build the Gold Standard version 3 standard requirements around the Sustainable Development Goals. And for those that don't know, here are the 17 SDGs. So the SDGs are structured as a series of goals here on this slide, underpinned by each goal as a set of targets, and alongside those targets are a set of indicators. Now the goals themselves aren't written for activities, they're really written at the policy or national levels. So part of our work in version 3 will be to translate those sustainable development goals and targets and indicators into something usable by activities, projects that can demonstrate their contribution to them. So that's a little bit about the rationale of Gold Standard version 3. I'm going to briefly talk now about the content of the new requirements. So Gold Standard version 3 really includes 3 key building blocks. Here they are on this slide. Building block 1 would be our Gold Standard gateway, the base requirements that will apply to all activities, and that really captures the activity principles and safeguards. So in that, you would the idea is that all activities would come through that single point gateway, rather than having the 3 separate scopes we have now. The second building block will be a series of Gold Standard approved activity and impact methodologies. So these will be based on the Sustainable Development Goals. Our existing emissions reduction methodologies will be updated and transferred as contributions to SDG 13. And you can quickly imagine other combinations, for example, activity-based gender rights impacts, or poverty alleviation impacts, water impacts, black carbon and health, indoor air pollution, etc., etc. So a series of methodologies, and those methodologies will either be activity specific where that's required, so for example COOKSTOVE carbon, or they might be more generic where, say, a tool could be applicable to multiple types of activities. So for example, a poverty alleviation tool might be applicable to multiple activities. And then the final building block really is the certified outcomes, products and claims. There's the product specifications that dictate what the claims, what the purchase of the outcomes of these activities and impacts can be used for. So for example, there will be a product specification for a gold standard carbon credit and a water benefit certificate that will explain the legal tenure, the jurisdiction, the scientific claims guidelines and the marketing material that you can use to support those claims. In terms of building block 1, so the gold standard principles and safeguards, this really dictates what a gold standard activity must be as a base foundation to register with the gold standard. So this would include activity eligibility, stakeholder guidelines, trade-offs, safeguards, sustainable development goal contribution, and then the certification cycle and audit requirements that go with that. It will look a fairly similar document to our existing gold standard requirements in energy, land use and water. The key elements are broadly similar but updated to latest best practice. The second building block, as I said earlier, will be a series of quantification methodologies. For example, biodiversity and health, as stated in this slide. And the idea there is that activities will be able to demonstrate the impacts they have are direct contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then lastly, in terms of claims and products, we broadly envisage 3 tiers here. Issued products at the top, so for example, voluntary emissions reductions, carbon credits, would be a fully tradable asset that would be accompanied by a product specification. Then the middle tier would be what we're calling certified outcomes or certified contributions to the SDGs. These would be a simpler product, more like a statement from the gold standard that yes, this impact has been achieved during the year. These wouldn't necessarily be tradable or fungible, but would be assignable perhaps, or sponsorable, if that's a word, to funders. So not necessarily a secondary resale market to those. And then lastly, a simpler limited level of assurance, which simply states broadly these are the impacts this activity has had. There's no product there, there's no assignability or claim that's associated with that. It really is sort of talking to the base story of an activity. Now, one thing to clarify here is that we're not necessarily looking to create 17 SDGs worth of new credits or credit models. So we're not necessarily envisaging a biodiversity credit or a health credit or a poverty alleviation credit. We would take each on its merits, and we would look at other results-based finance mechanisms and see how they might apply. So to be clear, we're only looking at carbon credits at the moment under our existing products, and the creation of a certified contribution statement, but open to exploring other models in the future. I think it's helpful to have a few examples of how activities might function in Gold Standard version 3, and so I've got a few here that help address that. A COOKSTOVE activity being our heartland territory. In this example, building block 1, it would apply the version 3 base requirements, as would every activity. And then you might have a series of methodologies related to COOKSTOVEs. In this example, for example, SDG 13 relates to climate change, so our emissions reduction methodology might apply. SDG 5 relates to gender impact, and so we could have an impact or a set of tools that apply to gender equality, gender rights, and gender impacts that a COOKSTOVE activity could apply. Likewise, SDG 3, health, and SDG 13, black carbon. Some of these may or may not lead to products. For example, they could issue statements of outcome, SDG contributions, or they could go on and issue carbon credits, as I said earlier. In a forestry example, similarly, the same base requirements apply. And in this example, we've shown SDG 6, sustainability of water, and SDG 15, biodiversity and terrestrial ecosystems, and SDG 1, poverty reduction. And again, these could lead on to other products and claims later. Now, it's interesting to consider for a moment the gold standard mission and the inherent compromises within that. So for the first time, we believe in the industry, we really want to recognise that by supporting the types of activities we support, that some of those safeguarding principles really do have a sort of combination of effects on each other. So, for example, agriculture uses water, water supply uses energy, energy supply might impact land use or food production or biodiversity. So we really want to acknowledge that and create a system of safeguarding principles that includes compromise and trade-offs. When is it okay for those expected adverse outcomes, if you like, to be applied under gold standard, recognising the interrelations. So I've got a couple of worked examples here. Imagine a landscape here. You can see at the top of the river basin the headwaters flowing down past various installations and domestic populations. Let's imagine for a second the green circle there is our forestry activity at the top of the basin. The forestry activity clearly delivers great benefits to biodiversity, sequesters carbon, reduces sedimentation, and retains water. So lots of good things coming from the forestry activity. But also we need to recognise that forests use water. Forests are can be at least pumps. You know, they will take up water and potentially reduce natural flows or reduce water availability downstream. So we see from this example there are several users of water downstream: agriculture, energy generators, and in this example the domestic city there whose users will use the water supply. And the potential for our land use forestry activity at the top of the basin, with all those good things that it brings, may also mean less water or disrupted water supply downstream. So we really want to recognise that and do something about that. We recognise that forestry activities are a good thing. We recognise that taking other people's water isn't such a good thing, but that in some circumstances that balance can be struck. So we are creating a series of risk assessment tools as part of our safeguarding principles around water, energy and land use that we're calling an environmental nexus. This will include potential mitigation measures, so maybe you compensate for your water supply impacts by including other projects in the landscape. It will invariably involve identifying and discussing those impacts with affected stakeholders within the river basin. And it might require you to do more work in scaling up the positive benefits of your activities for that trade-off. Another example here, the agricultural activity. Again, I won't take through this in lots of detail, but you can see here that the SDG 6 sustainability of available water is very important in an agricultural context. Agriculture being the 70% of the world's usage of water, domestic usage of water. And here we see another example of the agriculture activities in our river basin. So here, water efficient cropping improves production and reduces CO2 through tillage, but it uses water, or it uses energy. Two things: how much energy is required to do that water, and how much impact you have downstream in that water use. So nobody doubts that improved sustainability of agriculture is a good thing, but we need to be mindful of those impacts downstream and when it's okay for agriculture to do those impacts. So again, the risk assessment tools and the safeguarding principles come into play, and likewise, discussing with affected stakeholders becomes really important. And then again, mitigation measures or thresholds or conditional requirements under which it's okay for the agricultural activity to make those impacts will be part of what we do. So really generating for the first time an understanding of the inherent trade-off and compromise within version 3. So that really takes you through the rationale and the broad content of the requirements. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sarah Lugers at this point to take you through market development.
Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Lugers and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Gold Standard. And I'd now like to share an overview about some of the trends that we've been seeing, and then talk about how Gold Standard 3.0 meets the needs that are emerging in the market. And then I'll close with how we intend to take this forward. I'll first focus on the climate side, our first filter, if you will, of Gold Standard 3.0, and how businesses are being called to take ambitious action. And for good reason, of course. If you refer back to the slides earlier about the size of the investments needed to put the world on a safe trajectory for climate security, it's clear that the private sector must act now. And so you see business leaders and sustainability professionals, no doubt, are aware of the encouragement or perhaps pressure from some of the groups and movements that you see cited here. And some of the calls to action cited here are those of We Mean Business, and quite a number of them are directly applicable to the work that Gold Standard 3.0 will accomplish, specifically around the science-based targets and putting a price on carbon, which should free up finance or delegate it for emissions reductions activities, and the short-lived client pollutants that you see here, which are early methodologies of Gold Standard 3.0. And then if you think about the development agenda with 17 goals and 169 targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, the finance needed becomes exponential. And this just underscores the need for the private sector to play a major role in driving finance to realize impacts on the ground. And just as importantly, to be efficient and effective in doing so, to make sure that finance goes as far as it possibly can. Therefore, we need to define what best practice for corporate leaders in sustainable development looks like. Gold Standard is making our contribution to defining best practices by drawing a parallel to how INDCs of developed countries are being submitted, wherein they have a target to reduce emissions at home, but also to contribute additional finance to help those countries that don't have the resources to reduce their emissions that developed countries have. And so we're taking a similar approach for the corporate sector when we look at their ambitions. And the idea is to, of course, improve at home and to reduce their impact within their own operations, any negative impact, of course, but also to finance positive outcomes outside of their sphere of influence, and indeed within their supply chains. And new tools are emerging. New tools are emerging, like the SDG Compass that was launched in September by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, GRI, and the UN Global Compact, which outlines the process that companies should go through to define their goals for contributing to sustainable development, to create ambitious and credible implementation strategies, what you see in step 4, and then reporting and communicating. And we maintain that Gold Standard 3.0 has an important role to play in both steps 4 and 5. Gold Standard 3.0 provides opportunities to deliver positive contributions to the SDGs, and also to cite very clear metrics that can be reported and also communicated to inspire and encourage further action. This slide here also draws from WBCSD, from their report on reporting, and it emphasizes the fact that today there exists very little assurance around sustainability claims. Only 78% of companies have their sustainability reports externally assured, and of those, only 10% have any external assurance that are considered at a reasonable level. So that leaves a big opportunity to fill that gap, to provide the assurance needed to ensure that claims are credible and legitimate. So those few high-level trends show us that there is a real opportunity to provide, through Gold Standard 3.0, the framework to demonstrate best practice by financing a range of sustainable development goal impacts and climate impacts as well, which of course is built into the SDGs. And so within this framework, we see a few different ways for investors to engage, investors from both the private and the public sector. The first is in pre-financing activities, either through standard finance or through more innovative results-based finance mechanisms like green bonds, impact bonds, or advanced market commitments. Secondly, they can behave much like today's carbon markets and financing outcomes in a results-based finance framework, emissions reductions as within carbon credits today, or financing emissions reductions abroad as we're positioning that activity in the future. And also, of course, all of the SDG outcomes that are relevant within a Gold Standard 3.0 framework. And third, a concept that we're developing now is to certify a business's contribution to the SDGs. So for those corporates who are looking for that added level of assurance and to minimize their risk and exposure, they want to report credibly on their progress towards their commitments and then manage those claims, again, to avoid risk and to be at the highest levels of integrity and credibility. So that's the third opportunity for the corporate sector to engage with Gold Standard 3.0. Now, all of this said, we realize that there are still assumptions at play, and things are moving quite fast, but within the arena of sustainability. But we intend to take the work that we've begun with our expert panel and segment and create a new work stream, if you will, and then expand that effort to drill down into these market dynamics to ensure that what we're creating indeed does fill a market need. We're in the early stages at this moment of convening this group, but the vision is for the constitution of the group to reflect what you see here, and it's a wide range of different types of investors. We envision this being anchored potentially by Mark Didden and Kimber Panya, who have already contributed to the initial stages of 3.0 development, and then to expand that to include those that you see here, so that we see a range of sustainability-minded corporates, some traditional investors, more innovative impact investors, and also different types of funders and donor agencies. And then what that group hopes to accomplish is outlined here. The first step will be to, of course, qualify some of the assumptions that we've talked about based on the broad experience of that group, and then to determine whether or not it's necessary to carry out a dedicated market research effort. And once we validate assumptions, either by the expertise convened within that group or insights gathered from market research, we will use that to further define our value propositions and the opportunities to engage for investors that we've talked about in an earlier slide. And that will be used also to kind of provide a feedback mechanism into what we call the right hand of the standard, which is around claims management and the communications that can come from having realized the outcomes via activities through Gold Standard 3.0. So those are our thoughts on how we see the market now and how we take this forward with Gold Standard 3.0. And I'll leave it to Owen to close it out.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So to wrap up this presentation, we just like to take you through briefly some of the timelines for development. So Gold Standard has appointed an expert panel to support the drafting of Building Block 1, the base requirements that apply to all activities, and it's really this that we're seeking consultation on in the first instance. The first substantive draft of that will be released for public comment in January 2016, and alongside that we'll be targeting consultations from key partners, supporters, donors and developers generally. And we'd love to hear people's views and thoughts on informing that. That will be out for public consultation for 60 days, following which we'll begin desk-based piloting and further redrafting based on the feedback of targeted consultees and public comment. That redraft will then again be subject to a second shorter round of public comment and likely further targeted consultations as we go. So we're envisaging a likely publication date of later on in 2016. We'll also be following up with a launch into a road testing phase where we'll shortly be announcing our seeking of potential pilot activities. At the same time as all of that, we're going to be developing our new assurance and audit framework. So who's eligible to audit what's the model for audit particularly for non-carbon elements, for example. So that will develop alongside the main version 3 requirements. Throughout 2016 and beyond, we are also looking into developing new SDG methodologies in line with key priorities of the Foundation. So we're keeping an open mind in terms of what those SDG contribution methodologies might be, but also recognise that there are some fairly obvious and high priority areas that we're regularly approached about. For example, poverty alleviation, gender rights, health, biodiversity, that all really relate to the types of activities that Gold Standard is known for and expert in. So in terms of next steps, hopefully you will receive an email from us with this presentation and some further information on how to participate. And as targeted consultees, we would like to arrange a short call with you to discuss and hear your feedback, answer your questions and capture that information to inform the redrafting. We're really looking forward to hearing your views and I'm very grateful as always for your support. Thank you very much for listening.